With each passing day, I see gender ideology as a battle that the truth is going to win out. More and more people seem to be speaking out about it, or at least we definitely get less pushback when we talk about it. We are going to win this battle, but the issue is, what's the body count going to be? How many people are we going to have to disfigure? How many children are we going to have to sterilize? How many young girls' breasts are we going to have to cut off? How many families are going to be destroyed before this battle is over? So for all of you who saw the What is a Woman documentary, you might remember this lady here, Michelle Forcier, the quote-unquote chicken lady of the movie. Well, she's being sued up the wazoo, and a lot of these people like her, these crazy nut jobs, are also being sued, and the lawyers are jumping on these cases. She was recently sued because one of her patients, a very young lady who now happens to have detransition, was, when she was diagnosed, like many of these people, extremely mentally ill. So to celebrate me finding out about this lady being sued, I decided we'd do a video today on Matt Walsh debating a trans person on gender ideology. Let's get into it.
So I'd like to say that I'm actually a part of that organization that was going to come and try and derail you tonight. I didn't hear a single thing, though, that constituted an attack on queer or trans lives or an attack on me personally. So I don't know what they were on about there. Moreover, everything that you have said on gender identity, gender expression, John Money, pronoun usage, what else? The sex gender distinction, you are 100% correct.
Wow.
You are 100% correct. I don't know if you've ever heard that from a trans person before. I identify as a trans woman. You are 100% correct on there. And it is an absolute travesty that the trans community bases everything on such vacuous concepts. My thing is, though, is I don't agree with your conclusion. I don't agree with it. But more so, the reason why I don't is less a matter of argumentation and more so a matter of method. You've stated time and time again that your approach to this is to try and keep things simple and uncomplicated, as in you don't try and engage with the nuance of the position of trans people. But that's exactly how my org treats you. They don't think that your arguments are worth looking at because they cast you as a transphobe. I did otherwise, and I looked, I'm like, yeah, no, this guy's absolutely correct on all these things.
So which conclusion are you? You said you disagree with my conclusions.
Well, it's the conclusion that of the model that you're postulating of gender, of that it's just this, you have man, woman, they're biologically contingent. My sort of question is, do you think that defaulting to simplicity, if this is the most dire issue of the age, which is something else that I agree with you on, do you really think that a method of simply recoursing to the most simplistic matter of approach is what we should be doing here?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, I do.
You
because I mean, I appreciate I appreciate everything that you said, and I appreciate your attitude. I very rarely encounter your attitude from that side of the ideological aisle. So I appreciate that. But yeah, I do think that making it simple is the right approach because, to my view, it is a very simple question. Now, if you want to get into the personal experiences of each individual and someone who is who's experiencing gender dysphoria, and what do we do to treat that problem? Sure, there's all kinds of personal, subjective nuances and things like that. And if my child came to me and said that they were confused about their identity, I wouldn't just say, get out of my face. I would want to sit down and talk to them. And that's when you get into, that becomes a sort of an interpersonal exchange. And so you get into some of those personal nuances and everything, and that's fine. But the underlying fact, the underlying reality is simple, that there are only males and females in the human race. There are no other categories. There is no third sex. It doesn't exist. Even though we hear about intersex people, an actual intersex person would be someone who has the reproductive capacities of both men and women, males and females. Such a person has never existed, ever. So what I see here is a binary system, and in that way, it's very simple, and I think that has to be our message.
The reason we have to keep everything simple, one, is because it's the truth. Gender is binary, but it's about language. And language speaks truth. And language can also be easily misleading to people, especially little children, into thinking that males and females are arbitrary designations that can be changed. And well, that's not true. Language matters. And this is where this community, the gender ideologues, infiltrate schools, infiltrate language, is by the use of stuff like pronouns. Well, language is a grammatical construct. It's used to speak truth, and you don't get to change that just because someone told you that you are a special little snowflake. Truth matters. When you start changing language, especially in places like kindergarten, as we've seen in the last few years, this gives gender ideology a very, very early start into indoctrinating the young minds of our countries. These people's theories are not evidence-based. They might claim that, but they're not. It's an ideology. It's a belief that our identities are completely separate from our bodies. That you could be born in the wrong body, which is silly enough as it is, which would be an emotional or psychological problem, and you're supposed to fix this mental problem by physically changing your body. It's completely irrational that anybody would think that you could fix a mental problem by modifying someone's body. Let's get back to it.
I would still even say respective to that even if from your standpoint, there's only this binary, there's two. There's complexities and nuances even within social navigation that still might be worth you looking into. I would also say that a lot of your facts also are off. Respective to, for instance, the first sexual reassignment surgery actually happened in the 1920s. So that was before John Money. So it's not a case that
I didn't say his was the first.
What?
I didn't say his was the first. It was probably the first one done on a 2-year-old, but I said he was the one who invented. You started by saying you agree with everything I said, and now we're going back and you disagree. I'm a little confused now.
My point is that if you have it to where you can get to a different conclusion from the same arguments, it means that there might be something deeper going on here that for people who are actually philosophers, not rhetoricians, need to be dealing with.
Okay, we got to move to the next question, but let me just ask you this so we can clarify where we are. Yeah. Do you agree that there are only males and females in the human race?
No.
Okay, so you definitely don't agree with my conclusion then at all.
No.
We actually are totally on opposite sides of this question, it turns out. Okay, so what are the other categories if not male and female?
We are going to be here all night if I have to doing that.
We're not, because there's none that you can list, so it's actually a very short conversation.
All right, well, you're wanting to say that you have these other social categories, right? It's a question of, you're saying are, right? So the question here for me would be one of ontology, insofar as we're trying to posit that there is some kind of specificity, right? And you would look at something like intersex and say that this is like some kind of weird border case, right? It's a question of the kind of continuum that would allow for one to come into an embodiment that you would cast as male and female. I mean, something that's really interesting is you said that something like age is makes more sense to identify as. You at one point had, female genitalia when you were in utero. So you've passed through that, right? And what happens to intersex people is that there's just some kind of like different, there's a different of development that occurs there. So respective to us talking about these categories, it's not a case of there being this hard line thing. I mean, the reason why we also are not going to get anywhere here is because I actually would agree with you that something like woman is what would, in a technical sense, be called a floating signifier. So it doesn't have this like particular designatable meaning to it, right?
All right.
So that's why we're not going to go anywhere.
That's pretty clear. But I appreciate it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
I just want to make just two quick follow-ups on that. Is that one thing? I think that this is a tactic that you encounter on the left all the time when it comes to gender, which is to try to obscure it and make it sound complicated and to throw a lot of, these sort of abstract ideas into it. And from what I've discovered, and this conversation didn't change my view at all on that, is that that's the only tactic they have, right? Is to just try to make it seem complicated, but yet while also not offering any alternative answers at all. And the final thing on intersex, because maybe someone else will bring this up, just so we could get that question out of the way, because it always comes up. Number one, intersex, that category has nothing to do with trans, right? Trans man or trans woman is a biological male who identifies as a female. So even if I were to agree that intersex people are some sort of exception, that would do nothing to vindicate the trans man, because that's a different category. But as it turns out, intersex people are not an exception. These are people who suffer from a deformity, from a condition. Just like someone might be born with one arm rather than two. That does not negate or undermine the fact that human beings have two arms. But if someone is born with only one, then you know that something went wrong along the way. They ought to have had two, but they didn't because something went wrong. So a deformity or a sickness doesn't undermine the principle that we're dealing with.
At the beginning of the video, I mentioned that, more and more lawyers are jumping on these cases, and I think that the battle is starting to sway into our favor. There's a growing number of countries out there effectively that have banned this type of gender-affirming care. There's still countries where it's completely illegal, and, good for them. But at least a lot of countries have stopped performing this stuff or banned it to be performed on children. And guess what? There's been no waves of suicide. There's been no major mental health catastrophes. 3 years ago, Finland placed a strict limitation on medical interventions for minors, as they should. Sweden did the same thing after a 14-year-old girl was found to have osteoporosis and spinal fractures from puberty blockers. An investigation concluded that, quote, the risk of anti-puberty and hormone treatment for those under 18 currently outweighed the possible benefits. No shit. Many countries have placed severe restrictions on care that these gender ideologues would make you believe is life-saving care. Norway also analyzed data and has made similar changes in its policy. The National Academy of Medicine in France warned that, quote, great medical caution must be taken in children and adolescents given the vulnerability of this population and the many undesirable and even serious complications the therapy could cause. The gender ideologues would have you believe that these countries that are protecting their youth, or at least doing a better job than they were, are rejecting evidence-based treatments and placing their kids at risk of suicide. There is no such evidence-based treatments out there. And regarding that point of view, Finland's gender expert, Dr. Rita Keltelia, said that, quote, these gender ideologues were purposely spreading misinformation, and the spreading of this misinformation was irresponsible. So a lot of these countries, and of course we know Florida did the same, concluded that kids don't need their development interrupted, that girls don't need their periods stopped, and their voices lowered. Little boys don't need to be castrated, they don't need to grow breasts. What they need, if there is a real issue, is good psychological therapy. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please smash that thumbs up button, consider subscribing to the channel, help it grow, and I will catch all of you in the next video. Peace out, everybody.